Today on the Bliss Republic podcast, we have a very special guest with us. We have Mark Gross, who is also the co-author of Liberated Love, that he co-created together with his wife, Kylie. We'll dive into the relationship dynamics of this powerful book, explore the post-publication journey, and reflect on how life, parenting, and love has continued to evolve since. Welcome to the Bliss Republic podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Man, it has evolved, that's for sure. Never stops, does it?
Never stops, yeah. So how are you today?
I'm very good. You know, we have a toddler who is waking up a fair amount right now in the middle of the night, but I'm learning to continue to thrive despite much sleep interruption.
Yeah, it's a whole new life, is it?
It is. It's the best. I mean, it is the best, but there's also aspects of it that, you know, I'm sure for any parent, they know it's wonderful and you love them so much, and it's also so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What has been the hardest thing so far?
I would say probably just the lack, you know, you don't have as much time with your partner. You know, I was well aware that when you go from 2 people to 3, that changes the way the relationship orients. You know, you go from a couple to being a family, and learning to find our feet as a couple with sleep interruptions and all that kind of stuff. Just like always coming back to knowing that we're in a season, and we might have another kid, so we might enter another season. So, you know, I think when you decide to be with somebody and there's a felt sense of safety, not just a spoken sense of choice, but you actually feel it and you know it, then you can go through the seasons of life, whatever they might be, because it could be job losses, it could be moving, it could be so many things. You're able to weather those storms, I think, a lot better.
It's interesting. When I was listening to your book, most of the books that I'm entertaining, I'm listening to on audiobook. And you can really tell how you and Kylie have worked extensively through those parts that most people avoid. And they actually fear that when they come to that very exact point, that something bad's going to happen. But it's exactly the door you need to go through to actually have that confidence to, as you say, be able to weather the seasons.
Isn't that such a strange paradox, hey? Like, I wish we learned it much younger, but, you know, we share quotes from Rumi, like the way through, you know, what is it? The way through the pain is through the pain, or the way through, whatever the quote is, but I should get it. But the other one where he says that, why do you stay in the prison when the door is wide open? And I think the prison is the pattern. The prison is familiarity. The prison is the same way that we dialogue and communicate and relate. And I really wish I knew that much younger, that if I was to turn towards the things I was most afraid of, I would be free, instead of letting those things I'm afraid of consciously and unconsciously control my life, what's possible for me. Because it's the same thing. It's like you're afraid to pursue a dream. How's that any different than a dream relationship? You're afraid to pursue work that brings you alive. You have to confront so many paradigms and limiting beliefs that you've been taught, but they're the same paradigms and limiting beliefs that you're taught about love.
Yeah. I actually want to dive into a question that I got sent from my friend Stacy, because I made a little post online.
Hey, Stacy.
And
let's hear it.
Stacy needs your help. So my friend Stacy is in love and in a good partnership, and lately she has hit a very rough patch in her business, which means that she can't really show up for the dates, and she can't really equally show up for events and things that are happening in her social life. And her partner has supported her at first, but now he's kind of withdrawing and going really cold. So she is sensing that something is shifting and changing, and now she goes into a very sort of anxious behavior. What would you say to her?
Well, first, to normalize when one or both people, because if one is, usually the other one's experiencing it, are going through financial difficulties or, you know, shifts of business, which of course is true for so many people, I think, especially right now, to actually bring that conversation to the relationship, you know. So it sounds like he's been very supportive of her in that season. And so maybe to go to him and say, I first want to say I'm so grateful for all of the support that you've provided for me in this transition and in this challenging time. I was hopeful that it would lift, but it hasn't lifted as of yet. And there's two things that I really want to bring forward. One is the acknowledgement of your support, and I'm sure that's been a lot for you. And two, what are some ways that I can still prioritize us and the relationship and show gratitude to you and still ask for and garner your support moving forward? Like, what needs to change and what does it need to look like? Because I've noticed that maybe you've pulled back a little bit, and I don't want to make it mean anything it doesn't mean. So I want to ask you if I'm sensing that correctly and get some of your wisdom and feedback on how we can move forward where you feel prioritized and loved. There you go, Stacy.
There you go, Stacy.
Does that fit her circumstances?
I would say so. He's been very supportive, and I think it's just a matter of the dynamic between the two of them. And as you say, it's also here, it's a season, so they need to figure out what it takes and what's required in order to get through the season.
Well, yeah, a lot of the time, like a simple example of this is if one person is sick in a relationship or one person has a chronic illness, they take up a lot more space at that time in the relationship and maybe for quite a long period of time. And what is not often held simultaneously is what the other person is giving up. And that could be because the person with the chronic issue is actually feeling shame and feeling guilt. And so they stay silent about it, but it's actually that creates the distance. I think also, this is just on maybe a different level or layer, is that often I wonder if we're someone who's used to connecting through challenges, like being a problem or having a problem, I think it's really important that we explore, do I always seem to have some sort of problem that needs resolution? Do I always seem to have something that needs to be supported? I'm not saying that that's true all the time, but sometimes unconsciously, we don't move through things or out of things because it keeps people close, because it keeps them feeling important, but eventually it can burn the other person out. And also for someone who's always unconsciously creating problems or being a problem, they burn out of themselves. No one wants to be chronically any certain way. Now, obviously someone with an illness, certain types of illnesses people can't do anything about or they're challenged by. But I just see that a lot in relationships where, like, I know this one couple, they've been together, I don't even know, probably 45 years. And when one of them is well, the other one gets sick. And when the other one gets better, the other one gets sick. So they just switch. They're never better together. They're never well at the same time. And I would say that's because unconsciously their relationship doesn't know what to do without someone being the focus, because it's what keeps them together. But what's fascinating is it is exactly what keeps them resenting one another. And if they could bring that forward, I'm not bringing it to them because they're not open to it. But if they were curious about it and open to it, they could actually learn to let go of that thing. They could learn to choose one another instead of unconsciously try to keep each other close.
It's so interesting when you say that you haven't brought that to them and that they are just not yet quite open to that. Isn't it so interesting how sometimes I wonder, are we all meant to heal and are we all meant to be on that journey, or are some people just meant to continue the way they are?
I learned a long time ago that you can't get anyone to change and that it has to be sourced from within. And sometimes people are getting so much from their suffering, which that to let it go would feel like such powerlessness, which is actually really kind of ironic because they're presenting as being powerless, but they're actually sourcing incredible power from it. And this is a hard paradox to hold because we live in these binaries in our world today, but life is so much more complex and there's so much more nuance, because when you have to move out of something like victimization or a victim mindset, if I all of a sudden say, I no longer want to tolerate what's going on in my life and who I'm being, I'm ready to bring change to it, we often think that, because in personal growth language, there's this sentence they'll say like, oh, instead of happening to you, it's happening for you. The challenge with that is that something could have happened to you. And that could have been you're really like the victim of some, let's say, trauma. So if I just move you into for you, it can feel very negating to the actual experience you've had. So the complexity that needs to be walked there is that you can be the victim of something or lots of things, but it is you who must decide what you do with it and whether you stay there. And that's where you can't walk anyone out of that without them wanting to walk out of it. Also, the other side is we have to be willing to see the power we gain from our martyrdom. We have to be willing to see that we're sourcing it. I work with lots of couples where the one dynamic of the relationship is one's more avoidant, withdrawn, pulls back, has problems, etc. And the other one is always trying to fix the problems. And they're often more passive. They're often not direct and honest. They're manipulative. And they don't want to take responsibility for that because they present it as being the one who is the victim of the relationship circumstances. But if you're with someone who can't choose the relationship fully, you're choosing to be with someone who can't choose the relationship fully. If you're not ready to take responsibility for that, you can't change your life, and the relationship won't change because you're too addicted to the dynamic, which I know is a confronting thought, but it's the only way out.
Yeah. And I guess it's a big part of maturing as well, where you come to the point that you say, well, this keeps happening in my life and this keeps showing up, and I can come to a point where I need to stop blaming the other person and go into self-responsibility and say, well, if I can't change the other person, then I have to change myself. And to what point am I continuing on that path in that relationship to changing myself? And does that eventually long-term, do I benefit from it, or does it harm me? Or am I out and I'm choosing me in a different version, right?
Yeah, so many people staying in that, like if they can't change and you always want them to change, that's such a young energy that comes from a little kid longing for a parent to change. So simultaneously, what happens when you decide I'm no longer going to try to get them to change is you stop letting the wound from your childhood drive the way that you relate. So that's the first thing that happens. But what happens at the exact same time is you start to have to take responsibility for yourself, as you said. So now I'm not trying to get you to change. So if I stop trying to get you to change, I'm changing. And now I need to be present with and process all the grief and anger that comes that I've spent my life outwardly focused. I've spent my life in a hypervigilance. I've spent my life pursuing people who don't pursue me. So I really have to grieve the origin of that, which is probably childhood, and also all the times in my life where that has been driving the way that I relate. So if you're 65 and you're turning towards that, you probably got 64 years of processing or 62 years. So that's where most people stop. Because to actually be with that emotion will change them in a really beautiful way, but it will feel really heavy and dark at first. But that's because we associate darkness with bad, but we don't realize that that very grief and anger can be the thing that completely changes our lives and our bodies. You know, you'll change the way your body feels, because whenever you're suppressing all your feelings and hiding from the realities that you need to change and take responsibility for your life, you just create inflammation in your body.
It's so true. Like, my journey has been so parallel to the way you described the healing journey, let's say, from codependency in the book. And I certainly enjoyed lots of the chapters, but chapter 8 around boundaries, and also I think it was chapter 11 around grief, were my favorite ones. And they were really eye-opening, because I think I went through this journey, but now I have someone put words behind it, which is incredibly validating. For me, I also turned to Francis Vala's work, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is one of my favorite books. It's so good. because I was going through a breakup that obviously was like the dark night of the soul sort of experience. And I was grieving all of the men that hadn't chosen me in the past. And it was something that I discovered through womb work. So it was actually held in my body and stored in my body that I felt that there was tension that I couldn't access. And it was tension that was so vast. And I just thinking about it, I would want to run from it. So I was like, okay. I did a course with a friend who was an incredibly amazing womb work facilitator in that space. And then I just lined up all the things. And I came to the point that I was like, I am running away from my emotions. I need to feel what needs to be felt. And I don't need to feel that only for myself. I need to feel that for my mother, for her mother, and so on. And it went so deep that our whole family dynamic now has changed as a result of it.
Yeah, well, one, the magic of the womb, I can't even begin to understand. So that's a whole other beautiful, beautiful journey. And I always laugh when I think of how when women all get together, they synchronize their cycles. And I call it the worldwide womb. Like there's just this crazy, wild connection that is beyond. And then, witnessing my wife have our son, and then to see the magic that occurs. One, that she built a kid, which is crazy. And the second, that there's so much communication going on between them in another realm that it's hard to even fathom. But, you bring up such a beautiful point, which is, if someone's listening to this and even thinking about asking these questions, they are probably one of the first people who even has the space and time and resources. And that not resources needing to be money, but resources needing to be the ability to listen to an audiobook while you're driving or catching the bus or whatever it is, that we have access to information that can completely heal our lineage. When something feels so ingrained in your body, like a desperation, a feeling of like, who am I without this anxiety? Who am I without this distancing from people? Like, why can't I just be close to people? I run from all the people who want to love me. When we get to that level of it doesn't make any sense, it's usually something that happened before we even had words. So it could be something from, under 2 years old, let's say, or it's something that you inherited. When someone says like, oh, well, anxiety runs in the family, it's a chemical imbalance you inherited. I mean, first off, that's never been actually proven, and it's been disproven. And it's a great way to sell drugs that change those chemicals, but it's not actually empowering to people because, for example, I was working with this one woman who told me that anxiety ran in her family. And then we went through her family tree, and self-expression being suppressed ran in her family. Women not having access to their voice and their anger ran in her family. Feeling afraid of pursuing her dreams for fear of being cast out of her family. Divorce wasn't allowed in her family. I was like, all of those are proper sources of anxiety. Like if you don't have access to all of your emotions, you're going to feel anxious. And then it will, of course, lead to depression. So, I think there's a new path coming, which is people starting to recognize that their feelings are actually really brilliant. You would never have looked at human history and thought anything that came up in us wasn't divine, but we live in this time where we're trying to make everything technological and what we call scientific. But the science of emotions it certainly doesn't say like your grief is a broken part of you. No way. Your parent dies and you're sad. I mean, you don't need an antidepressant. You need a hug and you need community.
Yeah. I really enjoy the work of Jonathan Haidt. He basically writes about depression not being a thing that needs pharmaceuticals at all. And he says that your depression is a gift because it's actually your body functioning well, because it's pointing towards you being out of alignment with yourself and your life. I think it's so accurate.
Yeah, it's information to pay attention to, not something to treat and numb. And I'm not saying there can't be a place for those things for people if they feel called. I just wonder what would happen if you took someone who's going through deep grief or depression and you actually sat them down and asked them about their life and all the ways in which their depression might be wise. Because as that saying goes, when a flower fails to grow, you don't blame the flower. You look at the environment.
Yeah, would be interesting to know. I mean, there are probably people already doing that now. It's just the awareness for it not being there. You mentioned in your book that also for yourself, you had that experience where you're like, okay, I do need to face my emotions, but I'm not quite sure if it's the reason I'm not going there is because I don't want to go there, or I just don't know how to actually descend, to actually get down to the very bottom of why it is that I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. What was your take on that afterwards, after the descent? Like, how would you say, was it a not knowing how to, or was it your fear of going there?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. I'd not ever witnessed someone really descend into grief and come out richer, So it was that, but it was also, I didn't know how to feel it, and I didn't know how to not be consumed by it. So there was a fear of it. I think because culturally so much of the process of dealing with things like breakups is to just go out and drink, or to do drugs, or to have sex, or do all those things at the same time. That's how I really coped with heartbreak. I didn't know how to. I wish in hindsight, I mean, I get, there's that saying, it's like, it's all perfect and exactly right on time, blah, blah, blah. I think I would have saved myself and other people a lot of emotional pain if I had descended into it much earlier. And had I known that I would come out feeling so much more clarity and appreciation for beauty and love and sadness, it completely changed me. It changed me so much. And, I don't know if I wrote this in the book, but I share often that we try to save people from feelings that we don't know the value of. So if I don't know the value of grief, I won't want you to be in grief. I'll try to distract you and get you to party so that you don't feel your feelings. But if I've really been through it and I know that grief can change me, I will sit down beside you and just hold your hand as you go into it. I won't want to save you from it.
I feel that very often, because sometimes we do have to hold it together, and there might be weeks and months going by where I'm like, I need to cry, but I can't right now. and then I'm coming to this point where I just I'm just exploding, right? I'm a mess, and I'm just like crying, sobbing. And instead of, like, some people are like, oh no, don't cry, right? It's like the first reaction that we have. Don't cry. Why would you cry? And I'm like, no, but I really want to feel this right now. I just want to, wash this off. It feels like a cleaning, a clearing, right? So it's so interesting that, would you do it again?
Which part?
Going to the grief?
Oh yeah, 100%. I find it just starts to develop different flavors, and you discover it in different places. And, I think you're always uncovering behaviors and masks that you wear and ways that you filter, and you're just always learning more about relationship and how to make your way through the world. I think being a human is hard in general, but I think being a human right now is really hard because technology has changed a lot of the information we're exposed to. And I don't think that our nervous system is designed to take on so much information. Like, for example, someone who's quite close to me who lives in Canada is obsessed with US politics. Obsessed, like always reading about it, always talking about it. And I said to her the other day, like, I understand that you're interested in those things, but your life is literally being consumed by someone and a political thought process that doesn't even impact your local economy. Like, get so deep into your local community, don't even look at Facebook, and your life will be so peaceful. And the reply I got was that that's a very privileged perspective, and this person needed to know what was going on in the world because otherwise she'd be taking her own safety for granted. And I said, look, I can recognize what you're saying. I'm not saying don't be informed, but you are giving away your well-being to something that doesn't even need it. If you've got shit going on in your community, get active. I get it. And again, I'm not saying people shouldn't be informed. They shouldn't fight for fairness. Of course you should. And the greatest act of revolution is getting your own poop in a group. You know, like getting your stuff together is the greatest act of revolution. And I think it's fascinating that we frame it as privilege to not be informed about what's going on the other side of the planet. Because right away, that's trying to infer some form of guilt or shame. And the second thing, well, which I said to her, I said, if I understand this correctly, it's privilege to know what's going on in the other side of the world. Yes. Okay. In order to access what's going on in the other side of the world, what do you need? Well, I need the internet. I need a phone. Sounds pretty privileged. I said, it's easy to frame and justify where we give our energy away. Because I think about this a lot in context of relationship, that we have this device, a phone, that has social media. I did a survey the other day that I think about 1,500 people answered. And I asked, what is the most detrimental way that technology is impacting your life, your phone? My attention, and honestly, everywhere. Those were the two main answers. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. So like 86% of people chose one of those two things. And I thought, wow, we know this is happening, and yet we let it happen. But here's the thing. The most important relationship in your life is destroying the most important relationships in your life. So most people go, well, the most important relationship should be my romantic partner or with my kids. But by design, it's currently our phone. And so I think that the instant response to this tends to be, well, there's so many beautiful things about technology. I don't want to give it away. I don't want to not have a phone or have social media. I get it. It's not about not having it. It's about deciding your relationship with it. It's very similar to the premise we basically are arguing for in the book. If you do not have choice in the relationships you're in, then you are in a dynamic you have to be in.
And that's a prison, right?
Exactly. So if you can't leave a relationship, you can't choose a relationship. Now people go, well, that's not very romantic. Of course, because romance tends to be the teaching of self-abandonment. So I'm not trying to be romantic, but I could tell you that it will create a lot more desire for your partner when you realize that you are making a choice to be with them. Just like when you're drinking wine or smoking marijuana or using social media, you will enjoy those things much more thoroughly when you know you don't need them, when you know you can leave them. When you know you can quit those things, then they don't have a grip on you. Now, most of the time when someone's talking about alcohol, they go, well, I don't need to. I don't have a problem. And I'm like, quit for a month then. Oh, well, there's a party next week, and then there's a thing. And see, that's, again, there's the social conditioning that says I'm going to go to this thing, and I have to drink at it. And I'm like, who are you without that then? It's not to say don't drink. I don't care about people drinking. It's to say where you don't have choice, you must insert it, or else you won't trust yourself. And that really has been my journey, is recognizing that I've played basically like whack-a-mole with the things I've needed to leave in order to recognize that I now have choice in my relationship to them. Now they don't carry a weight anymore. Like, I don't eat sugar. When dessert shows up, I used to be like, give me that cake. Now I'm like, I'll enjoy it when I want to. And what improves when you insert choice in any relationship? Your inflammation goes way down. And I think about this from the source of the conversation of autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease is seen as the body being sort of at conflict with itself. Wherever you don't have choice, you are at conflict with yourself. And so your addictions, if they drive your life, which relationships, of course, can too, when I tell someone, don't date for 3 months, you should see what comes up for them, which is exactly what's supposed to come up, because now we have material to work with. Why can't you? Why can't you? Okay. And then they'll say, well, I've been single for 4 years, so I've already done a sacred pause. And I'm like, shit, that's not a sacred pause. That's just using Tinder but not finding anyone.
Yeah.
I know that was a long rant, but I hope that makes sense.
No, I totally get it. I'm in the same boat. I've been now celibate for 2 years. I've not had alcohol in a year. And it all went through my grief journey, because I came to the point where, hey, I actually find that everything that's hurting me continuously, although I've healed some past wounds, what continuously hurts me and is the most invalidating is when it gets to my self-worth. And self-worth, that was like the biggest thing for me, that to realize if I don't value myself, no one else will. And if I don't do the work to, in my body, when I wake up in the morning, when everything I do, prove myself that I love and value myself, then how will other people know? And it came with discipline of all these things, because it's like, well, yeah, I can have alcohol, but like, what am I really doing? Because it is a neurotoxin. And if it wasn't giving me that buzz, would I do it? And I said, no, actually not. Because now I value my body and I value so much more about me than I did before. So the choice has completely changed.
Yeah, it's such a different way of orienting to like alcohol or weed or whatever it is. You know, what I found through the descent into grief was that I no longer wanted to not be in my body. Like I had this deep desire to never lose control anymore, not from like an obsessive OCD perspective, but I realized that so many people make such poor choices in their life because they drink. And my choices I was making in my life were so sacred and important to me, and I was creating stuff that I really cared about on such a high level that I could not make a choice that could destroy that. And, you know, like I'm like anybody else. If you give me, you know, 5 shots of tequila and some beers, a different type of person comes out. And that's not unprocessed or unresolved emotion. It's giving the shadow the driver's seat. Instead, I work through my shadow in other ways that are healthy. I go from, and I think this is a huge transition we all go from, which is much like the transition that we were talking about being in your wound. Wounds are frenetic. Like you could tell when you're trying to differentiate, how do I know my trauma from my truth, or intuition from pain or trauma, is you have to first pay attention to that wounds are frenetic. They have a desperate energy to them. They're scarce. They want to get certainty. They want things figured out. And so when you make this transition where you're operating from more of a place of stillness, you're moving from dark coping mechanisms, things like alcohol and drugs, sex, scrolling, to light coping mechanisms like meditation, like deep conversations, like a hug. And sex changes too, because it goes from a way of satiating a carnal need or sometimes using arousal to treat pain to being something that is deeply sacred and connective. And, you know, we're not taught a lot of that. Like, I didn't have a class on that. I don't know about you, but like I went to a Catholic school and there was no conversation, even which would have been beautiful, a conversation about prayer as a form of meditation. I mean, I just thought prayers were things you had to do when you did something wrong, you know, which, what a strange framework to create for children.
I think there's a lot to say about initiations. I know Francis Weller also says a lot about initiations when it comes to community work. And one of the sacred things that we've in our lineage kind of dropped the ball on, and maybe that's also constructed, is to not have the conversations with our elders anymore. I certainly know that when it came to, when I had my first period, I had a conversation with my mom. She sat me down like, this is how the world's going to change now. And that held so much power, and knowing I have an ally and she's been through it and she's now someone to look up to as well. And in all of these regards, I can turn to her for. I think that's the same thing when you go to school and when you're younger and you want to know what kind of issue. And I, in the coaching world, once picked up this idea of like an advisory board where you actually sit down and you write yourself a board of people that you can turn to on different topics, right? And these are your elders and the people. Yeah. So I think like going to a Catholic school, what does that show you, and what were you missing that you would have needed in that moment?
Man, so much. You know, I think that a lot of the messaging I was given about religion was make sure that you behave properly, because if you don't, you go to hell. Even this concept of heaven and hell. And there was so much rigidity to it, you know, and a lot of use of guilt and shame. And my mom's from Ireland, so that's like guilt on guilt steroids, Catholicism. And in school, I wish there were more adults speaking to the complexity of belief and faith. We had a religion teacher who was really incredible, and he would actually, in religion class, he would talk to you about all the world religions and how they're different and how they're similar and how God has different meanings has a different name. And I really liked that because there wasn't this, you're not a believer because you're questioning your faith. He was like, you should question your faith. That's part of being a human being. And I remember he would like walk by when you were writing your test. He would walk by as you were filling in an answer and he would point to the right answer. Because he didn't care if you were passing religion.
Yeah.
He cared that you were deepening your relationship to one another. And although he wasn't saying this, but deepening your relationship to what you might call God. But I left that experience really rejecting the idea of God. The word had been weaponized. And so that's when I discovered spirituality. It's really the same thing encapsulated in a less confronting way. And of course, it can be weaponized much like any belief system. And Jonathan Haidt has a great saying, because he studies morality and all that kind of stuff. And he says that everybody has a God-sized hole inside of them. Mm-hmm. And so he really believes, although he's an atheist, he really believes that religion and spirituality serve an evolutionary purpose. He speaks a lot at Christian churches, which I think is really fascinating. And he said it's because both him and the church agree that God has a role in our lives. They just see it differently. And I'm like, that's actually really quite beautiful.
Yeah, I think we all get to choose what kind of role God, spirituality, and the church plays in our lives, right? And I guess it's never really divine to force something on someone. You just can't. Like, you can try, but they will just, it's like the pull and push where they will just reject it because they didn't get the choice. They didn't get self-autonomy. They didn't get autonomy in it.
When God becomes this place of judgment, this place is always watching, is always making sure you're being quote unquote good. But of course, if you're taught that sex and desire are bad and you're a teenager, like, I'm sorry, you're going to experience both desire and arousal. You're going to want to touch yourself. These would all be normal processes. And when you're taught that arousal means you go to hell, then you either have to let go of the belief because someone rational walked you through it, which doesn't really exist in young religious frameworks, or you have to hide it. And so, of course, that's what most people do, is they suppress it, or it comes out in a shadow way because it's not safe to come out in a healthy way. And that's the work we're all having to undo in different ways, of course, because very few people grow up with a healthy relationship to sexuality, especially from a cultural perspective, especially for women. But I think for men too, and I think pornography is really bringing that to a whole another level.
Because it's conditioning that it's hard once you're in the bedroom to actually be like, okay, I'll just try to be myself. What do I do?
Right. Yeah. I learned how to use a condom from a TV show. I mean, that's awkward. So thank God that's how I learned, though. Yeah. It was because, in school, they're not teaching you that because you're not supposed to use protection. As a Catholic, you weren't supposed to. As a Christian,
is that what they taught you in school?
Oh, yeah. You weren't supposed to have sex before marriage. Of course, all the people in class are probably having sex, and they're teaching that. And what's so fucked up about that is, like, every previous generation is the same. So I always find that's what's so funny about so many religious families and upbringings, is that the parents were making out and hooking up before marriage often, not always, but often, and experiencing desire and, masturbating and all the things. And then when their kids are growing up, they're like, don't you do any of those things. It's like, you were doing the same thing.
Did you do that with your parents, that you asked them, did you do that when they told you not to?
Well, no, but my mom's conversation about sex was funny because my dad and mom were sitting in like we had like a little tiny TV room in our house. I was in a relationship for like a year and something in high school. And my parents were like, my dad, he could talk about everything. He was a scientist. He didn't care. He would talk about everything, almost to a point where you're like, I don't want to talk to you. Made it really funny. He was good about it. But I remember my mom was like, well, I'd like to talk to you about sex. And my dad's like, oh, God. And when two people are together and they get excited, and I remember just being like, oh, my God, this is just so bad. And my dad was just like, oh, it was like watching a car accident. I got to talk to her about it because it was actually pretty funny. I don't think she'll remember, though.
She may not want to.
Yeah, she probably blinked. Yeah, she definitely like filtered that out.
How are you going to do it with your son? Have you ever thought about that yet?
I feel like it will just be an ongoing conversation as he ages, like appropriate to his development, that there be talk about desire, about his experience, about arousal, because of course he'll experience arousal before a lot of things. And relationally, talking about, like, again, age appropriately, allowing him to understand how relationships transform and what does intimacy mean and what does it mean to have your body and someone else's body. I feel like it'll just be an ongoing conversation. My wife's always telling me that we have to refer to private parts as like a penis, and I'm like, I call it a ding dong sometimes. It doesn't matter. I'm like, he can laugh about these things. We laugh. It's so funny. He's like just over 2. He makes poo jokes all the time. Like, it's great.
Maybe he'll come up with his own word.
Exactly, and that'll be great.
Yeah. So when it comes to exploring your sexuality, I think for me, one of the things that also you address in the book was a big learning for me later on, and just like the last 5 to 10 years, was my sacred relationship with my sexuality. Because I grew up with a mindset where I guess there were no boundaries around sexuality. It was just like the mindset of, if you want to be with a man, you're going to have to sleep with him. You can't avoid it. I think that's where it was heading. But for me, what arrived was, no one will fall in love with you unless you are intimate with them. And it developed in this really strange and painful cycle that I got stuck in, of wanting to be close, but never actually making it to a relationship. And I just couldn't figure it out until I was like, all right, I'm out. And then I learned with the time, okay, by being with myself and valuing myself, I started seeing the world differently. Like here in Germany, and it's interesting because I'm spending time now with my parents, because usually I'm in Australia, and I discover that like the culture here is so different, and they are very open and very sort of free with their bodies. I don't know if you heard about the German FKK culture. It's like this culture where it's like a thing that they all walk around naked on the lakes, and they have these sort of areas where you can just be entirely without any clothes. And it's like, I never had discernment for that. And after having lived in Australia, it's way more conservative. I started thinking about that. And I don't want other people to see me naked all the time. And I don't want them to have access to all parts of my body, even if it's just visually. And I guess like for me, the experience is that through the work, the boundaries came naturally. I didn't have to think about it. One of a sudden they were there. I was like, no, I don't want that. But you can do that if you want, There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just like, so when you really learn to separate your sexuality from connection, it just started making so much sense. But I had to come to this point first before I could change it. I see so many people wanting to be close, but it's all just that sort of sexual language of like, you're going to have a shower? Okay, yeah. Do you want to send me a picture? And I'm like, no, I really don't. Like, what? Yeah.
We're in times that have never been seen before with technology. It's changed so much. Also that you have access to so many people at one given time. Like back in human history, if you dated a woman, you would have to get on your horse and ride to her house and likely meet her father, who probably had some sort of weapon. And so you're really accountable to your behavior. and you also didn't have the energy and time resource to be with multiple women. And if you did, if that was in your tribe, that's great, you know, because that would be culturally appropriate. But, and if you didn't desire that and you were in that tribe, there would be a conflict innately within your own spirit and what you're experiencing. And also the culture or the community would hold you accountable to your behavior. So, you know, there's that aspect that we have access to so many people. We also have access to sexual imagery in a way that we never have before. That impacts the brain, that impacts arousal, that impacts desire, that impacts what we believe sex is supposed to look like. And that can be not very good, you know, because you could watch pornography that's lovemaking, and that would teach you something very different than pornography that's dark. And there's a lot of dark stuff out there. So being able to decide, what does sexuality look like for me? What does intimacy look and feel like for me? A lot of people don't even ask themselves that question. I remember Dr. Alexandra Salmon wrote a book on sex. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a great book. She has two books. The first one is called Loving Bravely. The second one's fantastic.
I think I read it. It's called Bringing Sexy Back or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And in it, I remember her talking about how most women don't even know what their private parts look like. So like one of the exercises was to get a mirror and actually use it to really understand your own physiology and anatomy. Like, yes, of course, you know, to actually begin to get to know who you are, get to know what you desire, what feels good. Because so much of sex was oriented around the male orgasm and satisfying men, there was very much a lack of focus on both. There should be a focus on both. She also talks about, and this is Emily Nagoski's work, that men have more of a spontaneous form of desire. I have an erection, I want to have sex. Or I'm feeling aroused, let's go. As where women tend to have more of a responsive form of desire. Oh, we connected, we had great conversation, we started kissing, now I feel a desire. And so just recognizing that humans have different forms of desire and they can be compatible, but we have to know about it in order to be like, why when I'm aroused and you don't want to, well, I want you to take the garbage out first, you know, like that's just knowing that that can exist. And so I think the restoring sexuality to being sacred is, I mean, it's kind of a foreign thing. And waiting to be intimate with someone is also, I mean, it's so brilliant because the love bombers and psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists, and there's a lot of overlap in those personalities, they're often more successful at short-term mating strategies. And so if you desire, which you can, of course, it's not a judgment thing, but if you desire to be sexually free and then engage with people like that, you are exposing yourself to more of those personality types. And it's just important to know that. Because the consequence to sex, I mean, there's many, but the main one is pregnancy. And for women, that's obviously a lot more of a cost from a physiological time perspective, resources, vulnerability, all the things. And I'm not sure the birth control pill has actually, you know, from a liberation perspective, being able to choose when you want to have sex just recreationally with no cost to that, obviously there's great aspects to that. But I think pharma was really smart that they sold this as a form of feminism and liberation. But at the same time, it's like it really changed how sex was commodified. And then I think it's had a really interesting impact on relationship, not to mention that it disconnects a woman from her womb. And that's probably a whole other can of worms.
Oh, well, let's open it.
Yeah.
Well, I've been raised in a place that was probably the birthplace of modern feminism in Germany. And it's shaped a lot of, or mostly confused me in how I understand gender roles, especially in a marriage. And on the other side, I now have like a lot of friends that are turning again towards a more traditional role of behavior in a marriage. Where do you and Kylie sit on that?
Yeah, it's been quite an evolution, you know, where she originally was married previously before she got divorced before I met her. And she was more of the caretaker, stay-at-home she recognized through that experience that if she's dependent on the other person, which I think is a truth for a lot of women, especially watching history, is if I'm dependent on you financially, I'm not free. Like I won't be free to leave you, which we were talking about before. Like if you can't leave a relationship, then you won't feel free to be yourself in that relationship. And so there was, which is of course a response that feminism had, is I will never depend on you. I will never depend on a man. I remember on our, like, I want to say second weekend date, we were hiking. And I remember saying to her, what do you need from a relationship? And she said to me, I don't need anything from a relationship. And I was like, oh, Lord, like, here we go. Yeah, it might as well have been playing like Destiny's Child, in the background. And I was laughing, but I was also like, there are so many unconscious walls and blocks in that sentence, which I understood. But I was like, you don't need anybody. Okay. I said, I'm going to give you a scenario. The man is working, and that's not like a gender role thing, but the man's working. He comes home. Wife has the baby in her hands. The baby has been like just crazy all day. When he walks in the door, there's two scenarios. First one is he's like, hey, good to see you. I'm going to go get a drink. I said, second one is he comes in, he looks at you, sees you're tired. You tell him you're tired. He grabs the baby. He says, go take care of you. Do you need him in that moment or not? She was like, well, I mean, I see your point. I'm like, all right, at least she sees my point. And the evolution of that has been, when she gave birth, we're now actually in the scenario. And I'm working to help take care of the family. So we've entered those roles. We really see the value of having a mother and a father, but especially a mother who can be present with the child and highly attuned. Now, again, I understand that that's not available to everybody. But isn't that also sort of the globalization and movement away from village has caused this? Because, before your child would, let's say I'm like you, I had moved away from home. Now I'm back near where my parents are. But if we had kids in Vancouver or down in the United States, if we're not by our families, like formally, we would have lived locally, right? We would have lived in a multi-generational home, or at least on a multi-generational property, and surrounded by kin, by friends. Your child would be raised by other people. And I can't tell you enough how when someone says, I've got your son for 15 minutes, you're just like, ah. And so I really think there's a big movement back to that feeling. And I don't know about you, maybe it's the social media algorithm is just feeding me more of what I think I want, which is everyone's talking about getting land, getting chickens, because there's a desire to move back towards community, because connection, there's that saying, the opposite of addiction is connection. And we need other people as much as we don't want to. We don't need people who are highly toxic. We don't need people who are takers. We don't need people who can't show up to life. We don't need people who are stuck in addictive cycles, which doesn't mean they can't have the invitation to connection and community and change. But the community has to create a standard of behavior that everyone has to adhere to. And like we were saying before, like if you step out of the values of the community, either the values of the community need to be discussed, because that could be important, that they need to shift. And I think we're all kind of like craving that. There's an anthropologist named Wade Davis who said that every culture believes that other cultures are the failure to be them. And he said most people believe that the ultimate development of a society or culture is to become more technological. And he said, but what we don't realize is that we couldn't be further from the earth. And I think that we're feeling that in our nervous systems. We're desperate for breath work because we're desperate to be in community with other people.
And nature.
Yeah. Yeah. a
It's
tree
chicken.
instead of an algorithm.
Yeah.
Right.
I surf in Australia and I just really enjoy being in the water just because there's no technology around me.
That's how I feel about surf too.
Yeah. Do you surf?
Yeah, but we don't have surfing where I am. But
Yeah.
when I go to the coast, I surf 2 to 3 hours a day. 'Cause
Amazing.
there's nothing to bother you.
Yeah. You're in the elements, you're in nature, and I think that's where we belong and come from. Ultimately, we come from the ocean. So it's actually this theory where someone analyzed our heartbeat and frequency when we enter the ocean, because we all do this one thing. When we look at the ocean, we take a deep breath. And animals who do that to prepare the lungs for being underwater.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. So one thing that I just want to go into is the new relationship template that I really enjoyed in the book. And I couldn't help but draw parallels to a really well-functioning village or society. I even would say that I can draw some parallels to a really well-functioning democracy. So it's really interesting how you guys put that together. And I printed it out for myself as guidance. Have you noticed as well that there are some parallels, and could that potentially be a template for a village? Could that be something that could be translated into these are the rules that I want to see in my political future as well, like in that area? And if it's not the case, I'm out. Where would you draw the line on that?
And wouldn't that be great if politics operated off that? You know, we were talking a bit about it earlier, but because of social media, we feel that we're further away from each other than we've ever been. We feel like I can't be in community with someone who believes something different, who thinks something different. And while I understand the ideological differences and the desire to get more polarized, because humans don't like not being right creates certainty. And when our identity and our politics end up intermingled, we won't be flexible on them, because it means our identity has to be flexible. And I think one thing that I've learned is that your identity has to be fluid. Who you are has to be fluid. I don't mean gender fluid, although that could be your thing. I mean that there is fluidity to your beliefs. And what I find is happening is that people who are politically opposed to one another tend to actually have similar values. They're just orienting around them differently, and then they're believing that their way is the right way. You know, if you were to erase all difference in relationships, there'd be no tension. If we were dating the same person, like dating ourselves, that'd be incredibly boring. If we were dating someone who saw the world the same way, had the exact same wounds, it's just by design that doesn't happen. You attract people who trigger you in a way that you don't want to be triggered, but yet your unconscious does want to be triggered so that you can resolve it. I mean, a community and a couple that really value difference, it allows us to find value in the diversity of thought. And we are always talking about diversity in culture today, but what we're not talking about is the richness and diversity of thought. Right? I mean, the Gottmans have some great work on this, where they show that 69% of all conflicts that couples have are not resolvable. And so they're fighting about things that are just fundamental differences or personality traits. And so they say that what really makes these couples thrive, instead of it being the point of disaster, is that they start to value the difference. They start to see the importance of the difference. Like, my wife and I are very different in a lot of ways, but we're especially different in how we load the dishwasher. She does not do it well, in my opinion. And I am essentially a Swedish architect when it comes to the formation. And I used to be like, oh my God, like, how does your brain think a bowl goes there? Now granted, I'm the opposite everywhere else. I just am that in a dishwasher, which is really fascinating. But it's like, I no longer am like, I gotta teach her how to do it, because it's not gonna happen. And I laugh at it now. I'm like, how the hell? You got 5 glasses in here. Like, this is atrocious. And instead I'm like, oh, for our dynamic to work and dishes to get washed properly, I'm the one who has to go in and do the thing. And I'm sure she would see that in a lot of other places for her. And so there's really value in it. Like, I don't see it. We could get divorced because there's a difference in how we load the dishwasher. And something as simple as the dishwasher will become very sensitive when we're not feeling seen and accepted for how we see the world in other areas. So we're not fighting about things like, why do you leave a wet towel on the bed? Although that could be annoying. We're fighting about, I've told you this time and time again, and you still do it. So I really feel like you're not listening to me. I feel like I'm not important. And of course, that will be exemplary probably of how they handle conflict. And so it's like those things become deal breakers and big deals when other places we don't feel acknowledged, seen, and understood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It's always the little triggers that aren't actually about you ate the last piece of chocolate, right? It's
right.
It's the you didn't consider me. I'm therefore not worthy, and I do want to be worthy. So, yeah.
What happens if we brought that type of behavior to our communities and our politics? I mean, our politicians do not model curiosity and openness because what creates votes is polarization. We need to build bridges back to one another, and I think that starts in our families.
I couldn't agree more. You can't try to be close to yourself and with someone else when you exile your parents. It just doesn't really line up. I agree. Well, I do have a final question for you, Mark.
What is it?
What is the biggest and most important thing you have learned about love in your life?
I'd say it's probably how exceptionally important curiosity and humility are. Had I known that was actually imperative to me creating exceptional relationships, that if I could just take care of my side of the street, what's aligned would align. And I think I was so busy either wanting to be right or not wanting to be hurt, which those are probably synonymous with one another, that I really missed out on one, letting people go who weren't aligned, and also really feeling safer within myself in connection.
Thank you for sharing. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Bliss Republic podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey, before you skip, if you're craving real conversations, cutting through the noise like a truth blade, the Bliss Republic podcast is where we drop the masks, unpack the human experience, and explore the deep stuff like connection, courage, grief, authenticity, alignment, and yeah, the messiness too. But here's the truth. Each episode is hand-built by me. No team, no editing crew, and no ChatGPT. Just me, a microphone, and about 40 hours of sweat, soul, and realness. So if that resonates, if you want content made with actual intention and not just an algorithm, then please subscribe to the Bliss Republic podcast. It's free, it's real, and every subscriber helps me keeping this wild thing going. Hit that subscribe button below so I can see you for more episodes.